welcome to Let's Pod This. My name is Andy Moore. It's good to be with you again this week. Friends, I apologize. I missed last week. I recorded an episode last week, actually, and you might be able to hear in my voice a little bit even today. It's a little stuffy, and that's because, well, last Friday, Ava, our current fellow, and I were out at the Oklahoma City Festival of the Arts, and we were collecting signatures for the minimum wage, raise the wage campaign, State Question 832. It was great. It was a beautiful day. It was sunny. The wind was blowing voraciously. There were lots of cottonwood fluffs in the air, and I don't know what other kind of allergens are out there, but golly, it just has walloped me. Today is the first day in a week that I feel and sound somewhat normal, and it's still not remotely 100%. On the plus side, we did collect, I think, upwards of 100 signatures while we were there, saw lots of friends, had tons of really good, impactful conversations about the issue of minimum wage and about how people in the public feel about our legislature. And I don't know why. I didn't really think about those conversations going into this. I was just focused on like my clipboard and having enough pins and doing all the signature collection piece right. But folks, as you might imagine, the public has some opinions about politicians in this state. Overall, it was immensely affirming and validating that this is the right kind of policy. Even the few people who, some folks just declined to sign because they're focused on like getting a Indian taco or whatever. But the folks who like declined to sign and voiced an opposition to the policy almost invariably said, we need to raise the minimum wage. But they said I'm afraid prices will go up. And I think in this environment with high inflation, I understand where that concern comes from. I will tell you that the data shows that's not the case, right? Even when California raised their minimum wage to $20 an hour, there was only a 0.4%, 0.4% increase in the cost of some items. And it is impossible to tie that directly to minimum wage. There's a lot of factors going on. Anyway, I will say on behalf of I myself, Andy Moore, and on behalf of Let's Fix This, we're big supporters of State Question 832 because our minimum wage is abysmal in the state. It is only $7.25. It has not been increased since 2009. And that means it hasn't been increased by the federal government either. And could Congress come in tomorrow and pass a minimum wage increase? Yes. Will they? No. Why? Because Congress is a big dumpster fire, right? You may have noticed they're preparing quite likely for yet another battle over the Speaker of the House next week. Speaker Johnson hasn't been in office or in his position for that long. Golly. The breakdown in Washington is shocking and terrifying, and I'm sure that we're approaching another fiscal cliff here sometime soon. It's gotten to be so often, it's hard to keep track. Anyway, that's why we don't focus on Washington too much here. At Let's Pod This, we talk about stuff here in our state. So I wanted to at least give a few updates on the goings-on at the state capitol, where things are in session right now, where we are. Again, I apologize for missing last week, and this week was just so hectic, and also I couldn't talk for half the week, so you just got me again, no guest yet. But if you haven't gone back to listen to our last episode with Jasmine and Jill from the ACLU, it was excellent. I listened to it myself because there was stuff that they said in the moment in the conversation that I wanted to go back and write down. So it was really good. Really thankful they came, grateful that they are here in our state. So there's a few bills that I want to highlight, but first to kind of set the stage, right? We are past essentially the last major deadline of the legislative deadlines that we think about for most of the bills, right? And so as most of you probably know, but as a quick recap for anyone who may be new, each bill is proposed and then must go through four hurdles before it goes to the governor, right? It has to pass in the chamber in which it was filed, the chamber of origin, has to pass a committee and then a floor vote, and then a committee and a floor vote in the opposite chamber, and then it goes to the governor. Exceptions will apply even to some of the bills that we'll discuss here in a moment. But in general, that's the process. And so last Thursday, the end of April, was the final deadline, which was the deadline to pass the floor in the opposite chamber. So essentially, if it hasn't been heard and passed most of those hurdles by now, it ain't happening this year, right? Again, anything's possible until they adjourn, sine die. We don't count wins yet. We don't, unless it's really been signed in or definitely defeated. But generally, we still are kind of crossing our fingers and toes, trying to make it to the last day of session. But most stuff is effectively dead. A few exceptions are bills that have passed out of both chambers, but had amendments along the way, particularly amendments in the opposite chamber, right? So an example of this is, we'll say House Bill 1105, which deals with the initiative petition. It is a bill that we've sent out action alerts about. We've talked about it here on this show. It started in the House. It's a House bill, went through the House side, went over to the Senate, passed committee, and passed the floor. But there were some amendments when it was in the Senate. And so that means it has to go back to the House. And then the House can they can receive those amendments, and they can either accept them and pass the bill with those amendments, or they can reject them, and then they can request that the bill goes to what's called a conference committee. Conference committee is a bicameral committee of people from both chambers who come together to hash out differences in a piece of legislation. That's the chambers don't agree, so let's let this small group of folks come together, work out those differences, and then both chambers have to agree on this new version, right? And so for 1105, that's still possible, right? It is in its current state. It is not able to go to the governor because they got these amendments they have to work out. And honestly, with this bill in particular, it's interesting because it was very similar but different in some crucial ways to a previous bill, Senate Bill 518, which passed a few weeks ago, that also made some changes to the initiative petition process. And as one example, Senate Bill 518 added a $750 filing fee for all new initiative petitions. This bill, House Bill 1105, would add a $1,000 filing fee. Generally, whichever bill passes most recently, right, so is the one that takes precedence. But those kinds of things are a little complicated when it's in the law then. And so it behooves the legislature to try to work out those differences and sort it out before it passes. Now, with these bills, there are some other aspects of it that are, ultimately bad for the initiative petition process. And that means bad for you as a voter, bad for democracy in our state as a whole, that I think they got to work out. And maybe they won't pass them both. We really don't know. So, if there's an opportunity for us as the public to weigh in on this bill, we will certainly let you know as soon as we find out about that. Another bill that is of note that's kind of floating around out there is Senate Bill 36. It's in the same boat as House Bill 1105. Senate Bill 36 deals with the shortage of school counselors, but it doesn't add any school counselors. It would just authorize schools to hire school chaplains, members of the clergy from any faith background to serve in place of school counselors. Now, as you may know, school counselors have to have a master's degree, advanced training, experience, licensure, all these things, right? Members of the clergy do not. And they could just be anyone who is ordained by their particular faith background, and they could, in theory, be hired by a school if this bill were passed. Now, when this bill was in the House just last week, the House passed, they authorized some amendments. They approved some amendments, one of which would require members of the clergy to have a college degree. And so now the bill goes back to the Senate, and it's authored by State Senator Nathan Dahm, who is also the chair of the Oklahoma Republican Party, currently. And as you listeners to the show probably know, like one of the more conservative and outspoken members of the legislature, I can't imagine that Senator Dom would accept these amendments because it certainly cuts to the core of what he had in mind when he proposed this bill. And so it would have to go to a conference committee as well for that stuff to be worked out. Whether or not that's possible is really hard to say. So that bill still hanging out there. You may have seen the news, though, just a few days ago. The Satanic Temple, which is a faith organization different than the Church of Satan, but nonetheless, the Satanic Temple put out a press release saying, hey, great, this is good news for us. We'd love to get some of our members of our denomination into schools, right? Like the Satanic Temple would love to have satanic chaplains in schools. Now, this has been the case in other states, right? Florida passed a similar bill. Some other states have looked at it and maybe passed it. And in many of those places, it was very clearly proposed by members of one faith background. And then when other faiths were like, oh, hey, sounds great, let's do it, those people really realized they kind of needed to back off of like, oh, we may have opened Pandora's box here. And once again, that's because there should be a very stark, firm, opaque separation between church and state, right? I think that's extremely popular nationwide. I need to Google the polling on that, but from everything I've read up to now, that has been the case. The public wants a separation of church and state. Like, we don't want politics affecting our church. We don't want our churches affecting politics. Those two things should remain equal. And the founding fathers honestly saw this, right? Part of the reason that America separated from England was because of taxation without representation. And then we didn't want a king. We didn't want a king that had power over his own church to bring that in as a state-sponsored religion here in America. And we have held to that pretty firmly, right? Over the last 240 odd years. But now, the last few years, you're really starting to see this drumbeat of bills like this that would erode that separation of church and state. So anyway, as you may have seen from our action alerts, we're big no's on Senate Bill 36. We hope it doesn't pass, but stay ever vigilant, right? If nothing else, stay vigilant. This kind of stuff can sneak up on you when you're least expecting it. Like in May, when the weather turns warm and we all think the legislature is tied up with the budget, wham, they could sneak it in. So we're keeping a close look on it. We'll let you know if there's opportunity for you to weigh in as well. A third bill I want to talk about is House Bill 4156. This is a bill you've undoubtedly seen in the news and on social media. This is the big immigration bill, right? So this is the bill that is the Texas-style immigration bill. No credit to Texas for this. Oklahoma's version is worse, markedly so, and is being passed in a number of other states, right? And this is a bill that is trying to solve a problem, but doesn't solve it at all. Like, doesn't do anything to solve the problem. The problem is we have an immigration issue in our country. You could say it's an immigration crisis. I don't think that's entirely out of line. And that crisis is here because Congress, once again, has failed to pass any sort of meaningful immigration reform for years and years and years. Right, this isn't a new problem. It has gotten worse over time. Deferred maintenance on our country costs more in the end, and that's where we're at. Right, people coming into the country across the border is overwhelmed. Despite calls from some people to build a wall, like that's not really a solution either. This is a policy matter. We need a policy response. And in fact, James Lankford, right, U.S. Senator from Oklahoma, James Lankford proposed a bipartisan agreement for immigration reform. But because of that conflict in D.C., that partisan bickering, and more importantly, intra-party, like the discord within the Republican Party, that bill was not even heard, right? Didn't even see the light of day. Poor Lankford, right? Like, really got kind of hung out to dry on this deal. It was somewhat because the Democrats supported it even though, I mean, this is a bill that the Democrats would have never agreed to, even like 3 years ago. There was no way. This was way more of a conservative win than Democrats were okay with. And yet, here they are saying, oh my God, it's so bad. We got to do something. We agreed to this term. And in that moment, the Republicans said no. And so we as a country are stuck in this immigration crisis. And so states like Oklahoma, Florida, some others are passing these laws, and we don't have a good word for it, right? It's I would argue that we should call these bills the seats taken bill, and that is a reference to the movie Forrest Gump from the 90s, which has not aged well. But if you've seen it, you may remember a scene when Forrest is a child and he's getting on the school bus, and as he walks down the aisle, all the kids say, "The seat's taken. The seat's taken. Can't sit here. The seat's taken," right? And Forrest has to keep walking until he meets Jenny, and she lets him sit down, and the rest is history. But all those kids that just said the seat's taken, that is exactly what Oklahoma is saying to immigrants, right? This bill, House Bill 4156, says that any law enforcement, even like the lowest ranking police chief in a small town in rural Oklahoma, if they suspect, in their opinion, that someone is in the country illegally, they can detain them and arrest them until they prove otherwise, right? And if they are found to be in this country without proper documentation, or, we'll say illegally for shorthand, I don't love that term, but if they are not properly documented while they're here, that person can be incarcerated and fined. And then I think they can be like fined $500 and put in jail for 2 days. And then upon being released, they have to immediately leave the state or run the risk of being arrested again, a bigger fine, more time in jail, et cetera, et cetera. Now, this is problematic for a myriad of reasons, one of which is like, we don't have enough jail cells to accommodate this, right? Based on estimates of the number of folks who are in the country without proper documentation right now. Secondly, most people who are immigrants don't walk around carrying their documentation on their person because they don't want to lose it, right? Like if you're at work, you don't necessarily have all your paperwork with you, especially if you think you're good, right? If you're here legally, you're not carrying it around. And so if you've been here for months or years. Thirdly, there are folks here in this state who came here legally, and due to the crisis of immigration we have and like bureaucratic red tape, their status may be in question now, not from their own volition, but because the government has failed in some way to like process things or whatever. So there's like tons of potential problems here. And the whole goal of this, as described by Attorney General Gentner Drummond, by Governor Stitt, by Speaker McCall, and Pro Tem Treat, is if people are coming to America illegally, we don't want them in our state, right? This seat's taken. Go somewhere else. And it's not like people cross the border and get like a brochure of like, hey, here's the states that you can go to, and these states aren't going to like you. You should go to Tennessee or Minnesota or whatever. Like that's not just, you're not going to Disney World and like looking at the map for the nearest roller coaster or whatever. This is people's lives, right? They are going usually to visit family to where they've got some sort of home base to start from as they work through the system. It's extraordinarily difficult to become a U.S. citizen. It takes months, if not years. We have a previous episode from a while back with Bruce Kaplinger, who teaches classes for people that are coming to America to become U.S. citizens. Super informative. I encourage you to go back and listen to that. I don't remember when it was, but if you Google immigration, citizenship, Bruce Kaplinger, look at our feed, you'll find it. I mean, I trust you. I believe in you. Anyway, this bill, House Bill 4156, did not follow the usual path to becoming a law. So I said a minute ago, right? Most bills come in, they are passed through committee, then the floor, then the other chamber's committee, and the other chamber's floor, and then to the governor's office. This one hit the express lane, right? And here's why. It was authored by leadership, right? Speaker McCall, Pro Tem Treat, both authored it. So they moved it direct to calendar. They filed it way after the filing deadline. They put it directly on the floor. There was some questions and debate, and it passed pretty quickly, right? So no committees whatsoever. Went to the floor in the House, went to the Senate, went to the floor in the House, 2 days later, went to the floor in the Senate, went to the governor, ding, he signs it. In the middle of that, there were some debates, both inside the Capitol and outside the Capitol, right? I was one of several hundred people who attended a rally outside the Capitol in opposition to this bill a couple of weeks ago. It was led by some Latino-led organizations who are trying to raise awareness, both among lawmakers of like why this is bad for Oklahoma, and among members of the immigrant community from, whether the Latino or other immigrants who have come here from anywhere else in the world, right? You could be an immigrant from England, right? These are all, it applies to everybody, that this bill is now law on the books. It will go into effect July 1st. And so we are now trying to do a massive amount of community education about this bill so that the public, including those who were most affected, know their rights. They know the consequences. They kind of know what's happening right now because they are scared. Like they are genuinely scared. And if they're not scared, they're angry. And many who are scared are also angry. That's not mutually exclusive. But I've talked to a lot of folks who are immigrants to this country, even those who already have their citizenship and maybe everything's worked out, but like they are still, in many cases, black or brown, they're not status quo white American. And they know that like, oh man, there's a chance that a cop could pull me over for no good reason and really hassle me, if not like ruin my day or my week or my life in some way, because that if that individual is racist, they could definitely stereotype. This came up in debate, right? And all the legislators were like, I don't think that's going to happen. I don't really think that's a big deal. And you're like, stop and frisk was a thing that happened under Democratic leadership in New York. Like this is not even solely a partisan issue. This is an immigration issue. And immigration is distinctly a federal issue, which is why states can't actually do much to regulate immigration. All we can do is try to make this state as inhospitable and as unappealing as possible to immigrants. And that is a bad stance to take, right? Not just because of the crisis at the border and allegations of like unchecked, just truckloads of fentanyl come into our state. That's not exactly the case. But because we have immigrants coming to Oklahoma from all over the globe for all kinds of reasons, right? When I worked in healthcare, at the university, we had tons of faculty and students who were coming here from overseas. And it is extraordinarily difficult to process all the paperwork to ensure that they were able to come here legally with a work visa and help them work towards citizenship. There's a ton of work and really hard, and it shouldn't be, right? Like to think about what it takes for someone to uproot their entire life, to move across the globe, whether by plane or train or automobile or donkey or boat or whatever, to go to a country where you may not know anybody, you may not speak the language, you're just coming in pursuit of a better life. It takes an immense amount of courage to do that. It's extraordinarily trying, heartbreaking, difficult, dangerous in many cases. And for us to pass a law that tells those folks when they get here, this seat's taken, go somewhere else, it's just like a giant fuck you to everybody else on the earth, right? And I'm sure that there are some folks here who like that. I'm sure there are some folks here who think we don't need immigrants. And they're wrong. are wrong, right? This country was founded by immigrants. There was a sign at the rally the other day that said, if you're not Native American, you're an immigrant. And that's sentiment is accurate, right? Like it's probably the one sign that garnered the most chuckles from the audience. But when you think about that, and this is a weird time in history because I have a number of friends, and maybe you do too, who are in the process of immigrating out of America, right? Because of laws like this. So not only is our legislature passing laws telling immigrants to America that we don't want them, at the same time, they are telling Americans, we don't want you either, right? We want to make this state as inhospitable to people, to women, to trans youth, to immigrants, to poor people. And, despite the things our leadership say about trying to attract businesses, we have a long history of driving businesses away because of these culture war, hate-filled, or at least hate-tainted bills. And so I think, I don't know what I think. I think this bill is hot garbage. I'm super disappointed that the governor signed it. I expect that there will be some kind of legal challenge, some kind of opposition to this in the courts, because there are opposition to these kinds of bills in other states, and they're all trying to pile on, right? Like, this bill is not really about immigration. This bill is about a partisan bias on this issue and politicians trying to make a name for themselves, right? That's when you see a bill like this that is championed by leadership in both chambers and the governor, and they're all members of the same party. It is very rarely about that issue. It is very rarely about doing the right thing. It is about getting their name in the press release so that people in the state might recognize them because they want to run for higher office, right? They want someone to know this guy did this. The problem is that sentiment cuts both ways, right? Because there may not be a lot of people out there who know Speaker McCall's by name. They don't know his name's Charles McCall. They probably don't know Greg Treat, right? They might know Governor Stitt. But if they're paying attention, there's a whole lot of people who know those names with a negative association to legislation like this, right? I was in a meeting a few hours ago with a bunch of organizations, and we talked about the missed opportunities that our legislators have to do the right thing. And I've been saying this for years. If you've listened to the podcast for a while, you've probably heard me say it quite a few times, right? That our state legislators have an opportunity to be goddamn heroes out there, right? They could have passed minimum wage increases on their own. Would some people have been upset? Sure, some business owners might have been upset, but 300 and something thousand Oklahomans would have had a better life because of that bill. And they could have been out there and campaigned and said, I worked for you. I raised the minimum wage. I am trying to improve the lives of Oklahomans. And instead, they spend their political capital and their time saying, this seat's taken. Go somewhere else. And I don't know about you, but when it comes to the traits that I look for in leadership, the things that I aspire to be in life, the values that I want my kids to learn and uphold, the people that I want them to admire, it is not the people who say, this seat's taken. It's the people who build up others, the people who fight for others, especially those who are downtrodden, especially those who weren't born with a silver spoon in their mouth, especially those who have to work their ass off every day just to put bread on the table for their wife and their kids, their husband and their kids, their grandparents, whomever, right? So if any of you are listening and you're considering running for office, or you're a candidate for office right now, it's hard. And I know that compromise is part of the game, but on some things, you just got to do the fucking right thing. And the right thing is what's good for people, right? And saying this seat's taken, instead of passing meaningful legislation that actually brings people together and builds up our state, is not the right thing. Okay, well, I'm going to step down off of that soapbox for a minute. And I'm going to share a halfway, 3/4 of the way positive story. Because I'll take 3/4 of a positive story over a bad one any day of the week. Senate Bill 1470, also known as the Oklahoma Survivors Act. This was championed by our friends at the Appleseed Project, Appleseed Center for something in Justice. I forget now, but they're based in Tulsa. Excellent. Colleen McCarty's their ED over there. Their legal director, Leslie, and David Blatt, friend of the show. Like, lots of good, smart people work there doing God's work. Like, honestly, they're trying to do the right thing. They're trying to pass laws that help people. So this bill, Senate Bill 1470, Survivors Act, it places some protections for individuals who committed a crime, but that crime was based on or significantly influenced by abuse that that individual received. Specifically, that sounds opaque. Let me explain it. For example, if a man is abusing his wife, right? Like actively abusing his wife, and in self-defense, she kills him, right? Under current law, she could be charged with murder or manslaughter at the very least. In this bill, even though her crime, quote, crime, was distinctly in response to this abuse that she was the victim of. Obviously, domestic violence happens in all gender relationships. I'm just using this as one example because this is one that they've got a great podcast called Panic Room that's focuses on these stories. And this bill would provide some protections for those individuals to say, listen, she wasn't out there murdering for no reason. She, in self-defense, killed her abuser because he was trying to kill her, right? That makes some sense. The fact that there's not already protections in law for that says something about politicians of yesteryear. Anyway, this bill was authored by Leader Eccles in the House, massively popular, passed the House almost unanimously, passed the Senate, I think unanimously, went to the governor, and the dude vetoed it, right? Governor Stitt vetoed the Survivor Act. And his veto message was super weird because it had this logic problem at the end that read like a word problem from the math test on the ACT or something. It was very bizarre. That said something along the lines of if Y kills X or commits a crime against X, and then years later X commits a crime against A, B, and C, then X would say that they shouldn't be guilty because of what happened to them from Y. It was a weird thing that, regardless of what it said, it was inaccurate, right? The way that the governor was trying to explain the law was incorrect, just flatly incorrect. And so the Appleseed Project, in their calm and professional manner, did address that in their response. It's no, sir, respectfully, that's not what the law says. You've misunderstood it or misread it. Here's what it says. And, so they call upon the Senate and the House to override the veto. The Senate did. The next day, boom, came back in, overrode the veto. So now the bill is over in the House, waiting to be heard. I hope that in this case, the House comes back and overrides the veto. We got some time. They could still do it. It's definitely the right thing to do. And so if Leader Eccles is listening to this, please, man, bring it up next week. Just let's get this done. We need something good to hang our hat on this session. The reason that it might not come back up, though, is because of the situation with the budget. And I know this feels a bit like a broken record, and if you've been following Oklahoma politics or government for the last few years, you undoubtedly know this is the story every year, right? We get through April, they get through all the other deadlines, most of the other policy stuff is done or nearly done, and then all eyes turn to the budget, and suddenly people are slamming on the brakes and swerving out of lanes, and shit just goes out the window. In fact, in 2017, we had such a fiasco around the budget that I did a daily like Facebook live video or YouTube live video at the state capitol every day for like 50, 60 days. It was like a long time. It was hot. I got really tired of doing it. But every day there'd be some kind of bizarre news story that would come out about what's happening at the Capitol. And the events that happened this week definitely remind me of that. Maybe I should bring it back. Maybe if you're interested, listeners, in seeing a 5-minute daily video from the steps of the state capitol about the budget battle, let me know. We can make it happen. But what happened this week is that I'll tell you what happened this week and we'll do background. Longtime Senate Appropriations Chair, Senator Roger Thompson, who's been, I would say, a voice of reason in the state capitol, particularly around fiscal issues for a while, was unceremoniously and somewhat unexpectedly removed as the Senate Appropriations Chair. Senator Treat, the pro tem, removed him and then appointed his vice chair, Senator Chuck Hall, to be the new A&B chair. And the way it's laid out in the Capitol, the chair of the Appropriations Committee has a special office. And so when Treat told Thompson, you're no longer going to be the chair, it means Thompson has to move out of his office. And so happened yesterday on Thursday, I think, or Wednesday. So there's like a photo. Non-Doc has a great story about this. And there's a photo of just like these big trash cans, right? Like in the door, and Senator Thompson's just like throwing away boxes of paper. I mean, unexpected is, to say the least, and almost like heartbreaking. Like Senator Thompson is term limited, just like Senator Treat. So he's literally in his last month of being in office, and to be suddenly stripped of the thing you've worked so hard to achieve, and then it's given to your deputy, who happens to office across the hall. So Senator Hall is just kind of standing there watching, like, oh my God, this is real awkward. I'm like, Roger, do you need any help? And he's just like throwing papers away. Also, because the legislature is not subject to the Open Records Act, there's no obligation. Any of this stuff is saved. And I just keep thinking, what kind of important information is just going out in the trash? So that's happening. And at the same time, the governor sent an email to Senator Treat and said, like, hey guys, if you don't pass the budget this week, come over to my office next week on Monday. Let's talk about it. And Senator Treat replied to the governor, and he CC'd every member of the legislature, right? All 148 other members, and said, like, hey, thanks, Governor. We will definitely not do it this week. And I'll be there on Monday. And the governor had said, we'll do it Monday in my conference room. We can invite the media. And Treat said, sounds great. I'll be there Monday, but we're going to do it in the Senate conference room, like in the big room, so that the media can be there and we can live stream it, and there'll be a transcript and the recording be archived. So like the Senate has had this push towards budget transparency, and Treat is doubling down on that and saying, if we're going to do it publicly, we're going to do it publicly and really hash it out. And then in the email, he said to the governor, we haven't had a chance to visit yet this session or this year. And that struck me as odd. And I've heard some others mention this as well, that like, I guess Senator Treat's saying that he hasn't spoken to the governor all year, like all session. And it's bananas for two men who were the two of the highest ranking members of their party, who control a big chunk of our state government. The fact that they haven't spoken, their offices are on the same side of the building in the Capitol, but for them not to have spoken, really kind of shows that there's a major like breakdown in communication up at the Capitol. In all of this, there was also, in the Non-Doc article, Treat talks about how he believes the governor has a hatred for him. It was some pretty strong words. And so I don't really know what all's going up there, but it's things are not copacetic. Now, as usual, the legislature's already talking that they're going to get done early, which they say every year, right? They have to adjourn by the last Friday in May, which I think is the 31st this year. And they're saying, we're going to be out by the 24th. And we'll see, right? Like both chambers have said, we're not going to pass a budget like this week. And now with Thompson out, some of these conversations have to restart. And what it sounds like, I don't have any inside information on this besides what I've read, and maybe you've read it as well, but it sounds like Senator Treat has been saying for months that the Senate would have a transparent budget process, and mostly has made good on that. Like they've had a bunch of public meetings all through session. They were talking about the budget way earlier than they normally are, at least publicly. But it sounds like, at least rumors, right, allegedly, that Senator Thompson was also kind of going around and having some private conversations with like members of the House to broker some budget deals. And maybe Treat got wind of that and then put the kibosh on the whole deal. And so there was some conversations with some of the senators, or some of the House members who were like, well, we had this agreement. And Treat's like, nope, whatever backroom deal you made is off. We're going to start fresh. I'll be really curious to see what happens on Monday, and see how this goes. I have to go to Tulsa on Monday. I'm not going to be able to watch it. Maybe I can listen to it while I drive. Maybe they'll live stream it while I'm in the car and I can just listen. That is peak political nerd right there. If you're driving across the state and you're hoping that you can listen to a live stream of a budget debate between the House, the Senate, and the governor, you are really a peak political nerd. And that's me. I'm a peak political nerd. I'm a elite nerd. I'll accept that. So we'll find out, right? That's kind of where that leaves us. A bunch of bills are in limbo, waiting for conference committees. Our state's telling immigrants that this seat's taken. And the House, the Senate, and the governor still don't get along. And now it's up to them to work out some sort of budget deal. So we'll be watching with concern. I might close one eye just to kind of brace for impact on what happens here. But we'll see. All right, well, that brings us to the end of this episode. And I'll add condolences to our friends at the University of Oklahoma and the Carl Albert Center, the loss of the new leadership program, Governor Stitt's anti-DEI executive order apparently pulled the plug on what was a otherwise excellent program for women looking to go into politics and government. Tons of folks have been through that program, people you know, love, and trust that are guiding our state correctly, of both parties, all parties. The fact that they're into that program is really, really unfortunate. But we'll rise again. We always do. You can't keep a good state down. Listeners, thank you for being here. Thanks for listening. Thanks for your support. If you'd like to get involved this year in any way, golly, we need you. I'm about to write an email with a ton of volunteer opportunities all the way to December, right? Stuff every month. At least one right now. We're getting it out there early, but we need you. If you want to help collect signatures for the Raise the Wage campaign, hit me up. Send me an email, podcast@letsfixthis.org. We've got some trainings coming up. We want to get you on board. We need help. We need to collect, 150,000 signatures in the next 2 months. So help me. Let's bust our ass. You can knock some doors in your neighborhood, go to events. We can make this dream come true. As a reminder, decisions are made by those who show up. Have a great week.